You're listening to the Second Look Podcast, where we take a closer look at what we're learning each Sunday at Connection Church to help you grow in your walk with Christ. Here are your hosts, Pastor Joe Terreri and Pastor Dan DeRochers.
Welcome to The Second Look. My name is Dan.
And I'm Joe.
And we're here talking about the King of Kindness, Joe.
Yeah.
But first, I'm kidding.
Very little agreement with
Joe, another week, another sermon illustration with your dog.
that. Yes. I've only used it twice. Come on.
Well, yet it seems like we know so much about your dog situation.
No, what you know so much about is my actual personality. The dog's great. I'm not a good dad.
I did like that you just straight up admitted the payoff yesterday. That
Oh,
was
absolutely.
Really,
There's no need to lie.
yeah. No, and that's
We're in God's presence. He knows exactly what's happening.
That's a great move, though. I mean, you come out ahead.
Yeah.
You know, you're offering cash to your kids.
Here, I mean, the dog is, we got to get a collar for the dog, $1,000.
Oh.
The dog needs to get fixed, I don't know, $500. Antibiotics. True story, last night, Cheryl's phone starts ringing at 4:30 in the morning, and I'm like, oh no, what's wrong? It's Lucy calling her and letting her know that Jane needs to go out again because Jane has diarrhea. So, this is our actual life. People think you're a jerk, and I'm like, no, you don't understand. I don't want to be woken up at 4:30, and I kept sleeping, but I just felt like, I don't want to keep the dog, Dan.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I did ask Lucy for her side of the story, and it really just turned into a he said, she said situation.
Lucy. She's actually the one that's hanging on. Olivia's
Yeah.
ready to get, everyone's
Wow.
okay with getting rid of the dog except Lucy.
Wow.
And she's stubborn. So she's digging her heels in, and I can see her, she's just in, I'm going to make a point kind of thing. So as Cheryl said this morning, I'm just praying the Lord would change her heart.
She said it this morning?
Yes, she actually said it. Yeah, this is our life. I'm not making this up. It's not for effect. It's not because it's a good sermon illustration. I didn't even
that's why you had Ezra.
I didn't even realize this would work in my sermon until Saturday afternoon.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yes. Anyway.
Wow. Well, but we're not talking about Jane. We're talking about King David.
Yes, we are.
And this incredible story of Mephibosheth and
good pronunciation,
thank
yes.
you.
Yes.
I almost
Nailed it.
stumbled. I almost stumbled, truthfully. But just this incredible story of kindness of David making good on his oath to take care of Jonathan's family. So this is kind of funny, but Pastor Tim texted me during one of the sermons.
Oh, I strongly dislike when the staff is texting jokes that I'm out of the loop of.
Well,
and,
you're about to become in
and
the
being
loop.
made, being made the go ahead.
No, this is nothing to do with your delivery or the sermon itself. He just said when he thinks about David and Jonathan, he often thinks about Anne of Green Gables and Diana, bosom friends. And they really are. So I texted him back David with an E,
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan and David were such good friends.
Yeah.
I mean, it is one of the closest in Scripture stories of true friendship, and I think it just really is. I think what's so cool about it is David remembers his covenant, and you think about just 20 years ago in your life.
Yeah.
And I think about 20 years ago in my life. I'm 22 at that point. I don't remember any promise I made from 22 years ago except the one I made to my wife to be committed to her until death do us part. And so I just love that David has this time to remember, and his friendship was so rich that he knew he had to make good on it because of his love was enduring past death for his friend. It's just such an awesome picture that, we often think about that kind of commitment in context of our spouses, which we should.
Yeah.
But to see that in the context of friendship is just, I think it's instructive for us because I don't think a lot of us think about friendship at that level.
I think what's interesting about coming into this story is, David does remember his covenant with Jonathan, and the heir, the recipient of this kindness would not necessarily be someone kind of on Jonathan's level for David, right? It's
Right.
almost the exact opposite of that.
Right. It is the social outcast, the ultimate social outcast, someone who is poor, disabled, not able to take care of themselves unless someone else is literally kind to them, and also this kind of political pariah as well. And David's like, okay, it does. And here's the reality with David. He didn't really know going in. It was whoever it is, I'm going to show kindness to them. And then he follows through all the way to the end. And think about, like, one thing I didn't talk about yesterday is, and many commentators point this out, think about Mephibosheth limping in to David's presence and the awkwardness of what it must have been for him to bow before him
Right.
as someone who was, quote, crippled in both feet. And you think about this moment and what is this going to be like? And Mephibosheth receiving the grace and the kindness and like walking in wondering if this is it, and then walking out an incredibly rich and blessed man. This is what it's like to come into the presence of God.
Yeah. So before we get there,
Yep.
I want to just talk about, this week, Thanksgiving week. Many people may be hosting family and
Yep.
friends, maybe people that they want to see, maybe people that they don't necessarily want to see.
Sure.
Holidays can really bring a lot of emotions, a lot of just challenging things for us to parse and deal with, just as we navigate these things. And so what does it look like for us to show kindness to people that we know they're going to say something wild in the living room, or we know they're going to criticize something?
Yeah.
I saw something this week that was like, when you go over someone's house for Thanksgiving, compliment them on their baseboards because that's what they're cleaning today.
Yeah, that reminds me of my childhood. Yes, I do think that these moments are often revealing for where we're really at. And,
Yeah.
and when we're with family and when we're kind of in the holiday mode, what's being revealed is how wide is my soul.
That's good.
Because it's easy to love people from a distance. It really is. It's easy to have warm feelings. It's easy to be nostalgic. It's easy to be sentimental. But it's like when you're actually in the room for 4 to 6 hours and you're just like, I think I'm just going to watch football because that's the easier thing to do. By the way, the best time to eat Thanksgiving is when the Cowboys and Giants are playing one another because they're awful. But, when we have to love difficult people, it really is a gift from the Lord because it shows us where we're at. And then we actually have to we were at a conference last week about giving and generosity, and it was really good. And the person who was leading the conference said, giving is like a muscle. I actually think showing love to difficult people is like a muscle. The more we do it and the more we realize this love has to come from a supernatural place, the more I think God's Spirit is able to flow through us. So I know this sounds kind of counterintuitive, but these moments are good practice for us. This is a good moment to, quote, practice our faith, put it into practice, love difficult people, have people around your table that you wouldn't normally have. I mean, this is something we've been doing. We've been trying to reach out to different people that we can think of and just say, hey, do you have somewhere to go? And these are people we like, but I would just challenge people, like, is there a spot at your table for maybe people who don't have somewhere to go? And I think that's, also part of God's love. It's not just family. It's also family of God.
Yeah, we've done that for a lot of years.
Yep.
Where it's kind of our table becomes, because we don't have family nearby, right?
Yep.
So it becomes an easy-ish opportunity for
Yep.
us just to be a place for other people who don't have family nearby
Yep.
to land.
Yep.
And it's not necessarily the easiest or most comfortable thing.
Nope.
Especially when you're bringing people to get, like, everyone that you're inviting probably has a connection to you because
Right.
you're inviting them, but not everybody has a connection to each other.
Right.
So it can feel a little bit awkward, like, okay, how's this gonna go?
Yep.
And it's always just fun and great. And it's not the most comfortable time all the time.
Yeah.
But it really is a time where you can show kindness
Yep.
and have a good meal and bring people together where, like, I just can't imagine being alone
Yeah.
on a holiday like this.
Well, and I think too, when you talk about that awkwardness, because I know exactly what you're talking about, I think we need to just be aware too that these are moments where we can actually pause and literally pray and ask God to be among us, to invite his Spirit to just sort of be in a part of our Thanksgiving celebrations, to, just be rich in our hearts. Because again, when it comes to the practice of showing God's loving kindness to people, if we're relying on ourselves, listen, we can kind of like power through for a couple hours, but then our flesh eventually shows up. And I know we talk about this a lot on the podcast, but we talk about it a lot because it's a huge part of the Christian life. We either live by the flesh or we live by the Spirit. And in order to really live by the Spirit, we need to continually be filled with the Spirit. And it's a really good idea to continue to ask the Holy Spirit to fill you and empower you, because isn't it so interesting? I was reminded this morning that the fruit of the Spirit is love, and it's also kindness. And so we need the Spirit to empower us to show this love of God to others in our life.
So there's not really a technique to be able to say, do these things and you can show better kindness or better love. It's actually the work of the Spirit in your life. It really is. You use the word supernatural, right? I think about my kids have been fighting a lot lately.
Sure.
Right? And one of my children in particular just gets fired up so quickly against her sisters for really oftentimes doing nothing, right?
Incredibly minor things.
Yes, and she just gets so fired up, and that's her gut reaction, right? Her fleshly reaction.
Her natural reaction.
Her natural reaction is to do that. And it's really not about a technique, taking a breath, stepping away, right? Like, those things don't actually help.
Those things are about sin management.
Right.
Yeah.
But what she actually needs is more of the Spirit of the Lord.
Right. Yeah, because we actually need to allow, I think if just to use a simple metaphor, and you just think when you're driving, just think of that yield sign. When you ignore a yield sign, you often can get into an accident. I was driving this morning and I saw an accident because there was a confusion about a yield sign and two cars hit one another, two cars in front of me on 422 getting off right at 724. And this is what happens in our actual lives. When we're not yielded to the Spirit, meaning allowing the Spirit to lead and go first, what happens is we ignore when we don't yield to the Spirit, our flesh gets out in front of us, and that's the reaction that people get. So we do actually need to have a supernatural, but let's be clear about what we need by supernatural. We're not talking about getting zapped, where it's like one moment I'm really ticked off at my sisters and the next moment I'm in a state of euphoria, like, oh my gosh, I love you so much.
Right.
No, these are willful decisions that come as we obey the promptings of the Spirit. So what we're not doing is behavior modification. What we are doing is surrendering our flesh to the Spirit of God. And that's an important distinction, because I think sometimes when we talk about the Spirit, we often talk about wanting to feel something. And listen, there are many times where the Spirit allows us in a manifest way to sense His presence. But even if we don't feel His presence, we can still surrender to the Spirit. And that yielding is going to be so important if we're really going to learn to love, because we're going to have to follow His promptings, not the promptings of our flesh.
I think one of the ways that we try to self-manage that is kind of avoidance by only putting ourselves around people that we get along with, people that we like.
Well, that's my whole point about talking about the church yesterday. It's like, and let's just say, it's natural to love the people you naturally love.
Yeah.
It's supernatural to love the people that are difficult to love. Like, that's where we really do need the Spirit of God. So, like, if you're in a fight with your spouse and they're really making you upset, you need supernatural love to love them in that moment of conflict. When your kids are driving you bananas, you need supernatural love to love them in that moment of frustration between two siblings. And, but like when you're with your friends and it's like, hey, we all get along and talk about sports, there's nothing supernatural about that. Yeah. But if you're actually going to be friends, if you're actually going to love one another over the long haul, when you walk with someone long enough, you will offend the other person at some point. And that's where the supernatural love and kindness of God really comes into effect. Or another way to think about it, not just in a negative sense, but in a positive sense, the Spirit will lead you to make sacrifices for other people, for their good, that will cost you time, money and energy. And this is also a way that the Spirit leads us into this Hesed kind of love.
Well, and I think when we ask ourselves the question, how committed am I to the people around me?
Yeah.
It is in that inconvenienced state,
Yes.
right? We're going to be offended. We're going to be inconvenienced. It's going to cost us something rather than being that mutually beneficial type of relationship.
Yeah.
And that's really what it's like being part of the church. Not that it's all wildly inconvenient.
Sure.
But
Well, I would say on a personal level, I am winning being part of a church, right?
For sure.
Like the church has so deeply enriched my life, and yet we still one thing that's really important for me on a personal level is that we're just always living in reality. Hence why I tell stories about my dog and what my home life is actually like the funny moments, because it's like, this is real life. Like I'm not, but like I love the church, and I just want to be so clear. My wife and I and our family, we are tremendously benefited by being part of this church. And it's not just because I get paid by the church. It's like our lives have become so rich because of the relationships we have literally at Connection Church. But we also need to be honest that, like we all experience, there's people who do bring nothing to our life. Like they're not bringing they're not enriching our lives. Like sometimes they're just taking, or they are difficult to love, or to love them means that I have to go the extra mile. And we all experience this, and people experience that from us, too. Like we are that person for some people. And so this is where God is revealing where our love is kind of maybe narrow and frugal and cheap.
And for us, when we think about ourselves with the Lord,
Yep.
we really are that person that's tough to love, right? We think about the other people in our life. It's us.
Right.
It's me.
Like, what are we bringing to the Lord other than our brokenness and our sin and our shame and our neuroses? Like, all we're bringing is just our broken lives to the Lord, you know? And He loves us. And like, it's amazing. Like the King of the universe who created us, who we have spent so much of our lives spurning and rebelling against, even in small ways, or even just like the days where we don't make it to our quiet time, or we don't pray that much. It's like, we just kind of said, hey, I don't need my creator today, and listen, I don't say that as a source of guilt or shame at all. Like I say that as like, it's kind of hilarious that we would think that somehow we're doing God any big favors,
Right.
But He just chooses to love us. He has chosen to be faithful. And here's the thing, God will always be faithful to us because that is His character, and He will not deny Himself.
Yeah, man. And we can live in that reality. Talk about wanting to give thanks.
Yeah.
Right? When we give thanks, we can think about the fact that we do have a seat at His table like one of His sons.
Yep.
And we are the pariah.
Yep.
We're the crippled,
Yep.
poor nobody coming into His presence.
Yeah.
It's really an incredible thing to think about.
Yeah, and it's not, and I just want to be so clear, like, we don't talk in language like this so we all have really low self-esteem.
That's good.
We talk in language like this so we have a humble disposition, and we live our lives not with a sense of like, I'm a loser. Like, no Christian should be talking that way. Like I've heard Christians say that, like, I'm just a loser, I'm just a screw up, or I'm just it's like, no, you're a child of the Most High God.
Yeah.
But we need to remember where we came from, so that pride doesn't set in, and feeling superior to others or inferior to others. Because understand, superiority and inferiority complexes are both pride. Like, when you're superior to others, that pride is more obvious. But when you always feel inferior to other people, that is actually just a different form of pride. And here's the pride: I don't believe what God says about me. My opinion of myself is more important than what God says about me. So we need to be so careful that we know, yes, and I said this yesterday, I think only in the first service, when we sing Amazing Grace, the grace that saved a wretch like me, like that's true, but we aren't wretches anymore. We're saints, we're sons and daughters, we're beloved, and yes, we are sinners, but we are sinners saved by grace who are now saints. Yeah. And so when we talk in language about our sinful nature and about our life before Christ and who we are without him, it's not to beat ourselves up, it's to bring us to this place of clear-minded humility, or as Paul says in Romans 12, we ought to think of ourselves with sober judgment. We need to be sober about who we are so we don't get too high and we also don't get too low, but we know who we are, and that allows us to really love and minister to other people out of a healthy place.
Yeah. Joe, before we go, favorite Thanksgiving side dish?
Yeah. Cranberry sauce. My wife makes it homemade from fresh cranberries, and I love that. And here's why it's my favorite, because I put it on everything, and it just makes everything better.
And what's going to be Jane's favorite side dish?
New home.
This has been another episode of The Second Look. You can catch this sermon and much more at our website, cometoconnect.com. Have a great week.